The radar operator's voice cracked across the operations room, cutting through the low hum of screens and the careful silence that only exists when people are holding their breath. "We have a medical emergency. F-22 Raptor, call sign Blaze 1, pilot showing signs of hypoxia. Altitude 18,000, airspeed degrading. We are requesting immediate ground intercept and possible guided recovery." Colonel Amina Raza did not look up from the maintenance report she was reading in the corner office. The report was about a hydraulic leak on a JF-17 that would probably take 3 more days to clear, the kind of thing that used to bore her half to death back when she still let boredom be a feeling she acknowledged. The kind of thing that her job now consisted of day after day for 12 years. She heard chairs scrape. She heard the sharp intake of breath from whoever was working the American liaison desk. She heard Captain Billel say something clipped and professional about intercept vectors and fuel states. She heard Lieutenant Zara, the new girl fresh from flight school, say something that almost sounded like a question before stopping herself. But she did not look up. The operations room was a place where Amina Raza was furniture. She held the rank of colonel, which meant people said yes ma'am to her when they had to and avoided her in the hallway when they could. She had a desk, a security clearance that had not been updated in 6 years, and a reputation for being exactly the kind of person you wanted filing paperwork when nobody else wanted to do it. Efficient, quiet, invisible. The way a woman in a military that did not quite know what to do with her became, over time, if she chose survival over visibility. The file on her desk was 17 pages long. She had read it twice already this morning. She would read it again this afternoon. This was her life now. "Vector the intercept through the northern corridor. They'll have visual in approximately 4 minutes, Billel was saying. "Get Flight Lieutenant Danish Airborne immediately. He's the only current fast jet-rated pilot available on base." Amina turned a page in the maintenance report, even though she had finished reading it 6 minutes ago. "Sir, Danish is at minimum fuel right now from his dawn patrol training run," someone said. That was Zara again, and she sounded uncertain, which meant she was new enough to still believe that facts mattered more than procedure. She would learn better. They all did eventually. "Then he gets fuel first, gets airborne second, and completes intercept third," Billel said, and that was the end of that discussion, because Billel was the duty controller, and in the operations room, the duty controller's word was the air everyone breathed. Amina turned another page. "The thing about hiding who you were for 12 years was that it became so automatic, so much a part of your skeleton, that you forgot other people could see through you if they looked hard enough." She had not counted on Zara looking. Zara had that quality that young, confident pilots had before the system taught them to stop asking questions. She had looked at Amina's personnel file 3 weeks ago, during a slow afternoon when she was supposed to be organizing spare parts inventory, and instead had pulled up old records like someone reading a mystery novel. Zara had never mentioned it, but Amina could feel the knowing every time the girl looked at her. That kind of knowing was dangerous. It was the kind of knowing that made people start asking why, and Amina had spent 12 years avoiding the question of why because the answer was complicated enough to break something if she spoke it out loud. The emergency on the radio continued to unfold in real time, and Amina forced herself to focus on the maintenance report, to let her eyes track the words about compression rates and seal integrity. To do the thing she had taught herself to do, which was to stop being the person she had been and become the person the system had decided she was now. But her hands, they remembered other things. Her hands remembered the grip on a stick, the specific pressure needed to pull a JF-17 into a turn so tight that the G-forces pushed everything in her body toward the edge of consciousness and refused to let her flinch. They remembered the feeling of punching through cloud layers at 500 knots, of knowing the aircraft so completely that you could not tell where the machine ended and you began. They remembered blood on the oxygen mask and the sound of Tariq laughing at her during a training run, saying she flew like she had something to prove, and her laughing back, saying that was because she did. The hands on her now, though, the hands that held this maintenance report, these hands had learned to do nothing. These hands had learned to wait. "F-22 pilot is still not responding to radio calls," Billel said, and his voice had changed. It had lost that practiced edge of control and picked up something else. Something that sounded like the beginning of panic, the kind that usually came right before someone made a mistake they would regret for the rest of their life. "Altitude now 16,000. We have maybe 6, maybe 7 minutes before he either crashes or ejects over terrain we cannot recover him from." Amina closed the maintenance report. The officers in the operations room were young, most of them. Billel was 32, she thought, maybe 33. Zara was not yet 26. There was a flight controller named Hassan who could not have been more than 28. They had learned their jobs from textbooks and flight simulators and from watching other people make decisions in controlled circumstances. They had not learned what it felt like to make a decision when there was no good option, when every single choice in front of you led to something breaking. She stood up. "Where is Flight Lieutenant Danish?" she asked, and her voice sounded strange in her own ears, like she was hearing it translated back from another language. Bill turned. Everyone in the operations room turned, actually, because the woman in the corner had not spoken a single unnecessary word since 2009, an unexpected speech from her registered on something deeper than just human attention. "Colonel, he is being fueled for emergency launch, but minimum safe intercept time is still 8 to 9 minutes. The F-22 pilot will run out of altitude before." Bill stopped. He was intelligent enough to hear what he had just said out loud. The F-22 pilot will run out of altitude before Danish can reach him. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. Amina walked to the operations desk. She moved slowly, deliberately, the way she had learned to move in the last 12 years, the way that said she was not a threat, was not a problem, was not someone who was about to challenge the established order of things. "Sir, with respect," she said, and the sir was for Bill, who held the authority right now. "Flight Lieutenant Danish cannot make this intercept. Not in 8 minutes, not in 10. The numbers do not work, and if you launch him with knowing that, you are launching him to fail." Bill's face tightened. "Colonel, I understand you have operational experience, but this situation requires a current, rated pilot, and the protocol is clear that we launch our nearest available asset. That is what we do." "That is what you do when you have the luxury of time," Amina said. "You do not have the luxury of time. You have a pilot who is currently hypoxic and unconscious over terrain that will kill him in moments. You have an aircraft that is, right now, following whatever heading its autopilot is holding, and that heading is taking him directly toward the Suleiman range. You have 6 minutes, maybe 7. Flight Lieutenant Danish will arrive 9 minutes from now." "Then what do you suggest, Colonel?" Bill asked, and it was not a real question. It was the kind of thing people asked right before they did what they had already decided to do. "I suggest," Amina said, "that you launch the ready intercept aircraft from Strip 2, the JF-17 that has been fueled and prepped since 0600 this morning, the one that can be airborne in 3 minutes, not 9. The operations room did not go quiet. It had already been quiet. Instead, it became a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes when everyone realizes something has shifted and nobody is quite sure yet what that means. "Strip 2 is assigned to standby rotation," Hassan said. "It is not a ready aircraft." "It is fueled," Zara said softly. Everyone looked at her. She was reading something on her screen, her fingers moving quickly. "Strip 2 JF-17 is fueled and armed and has been holding on internal reserve rotation for 2 hours. It is technically available." "It has a pilot?" Bill asked. Nobody answered for a moment. "No," Amina said, "it does not have a pilot, it has me." The second silence was the real one. "Colonel Raza," Bill said, and his voice had gone very careful, "you have not flown a combat mission in 12 years. Your flight status is inactive. Your currency expired in 2012. I cannot authorize you to." "You cannot authorize it," Amina said. "That is correct. But General Farah can. And if you want to wait for the general to wake up and read his emails, we will have this pilot's funeral on a Thursday instead of a Friday." She did not wait for Bill to respond. She was already walking toward the door, already moving like someone who had a destination, who had a purpose, who was not the kind of person you told to stop when she was moving with that kind of certainty. Zara caught up with her in the corridor outside the operations room. "Ma'am," Zara said, and she was not asking permission, she was stating fact. "Your call sign was Viper. I read your file. You were ranked 19th in the world for fast jet intercept maneuvers, and that was before they stopped publishing the rankings." Amina did not slow down. "That was a long time ago." "It was 12 years ago," Zara said. "That means it was still true when you decided to stop being a pilot. It means you were still the best person for this right now." They were walking toward the ready room now, toward the place where the flight gear hung on hooks and the air always smelled like something between leather and fuel and electricity. Amina could feel her heart doing something strange in her chest, something between panic and recognition, like a part of her body that had been asleep was waking up and finding out that she had agreed to climb a mountain. "Being good at something 12 years ago does not make you good at it now," Amina said. No, Zara said, but your hands do not forget, your mind does not forget. And right now there is an American pilot dying at altitude because we do not have enough time for the rules. He needs someone who can intercept in 3 minutes instead of 9. He needs Viper. When Amina pulled on the flight suit, her fingers remembered the zippers, the snaps, the order of things. When she sat down and began to strap the harness, her body remembered which arm went where, which buckle locked, which strap tightened to what degree. The body remembered. It was always the body that remembered first. The helmet was a different story. They had to find one that fit, and it took 14 minutes of searching through storage lockers before they found one from the era before Amina's 12-year absence, one that had her oxygen connection already in place, one that was familiar enough that she did not feel like she was putting on someone else's skin. Colonel General Farrak was already on the base by the time she walked toward Strip 2. He had gotten the call from someone, probably Bill, probably Hassan, probably both of them, because this was the kind of decision that nobody wanted to make alone. The general was 61 years old, had more stars on his uniform than anyone else on the base, and had the kind of face that looked like it had already made every difficult decision a military career could require of him. He was standing on the tarmac near the F-17, watching the ground crew finish the pre-flight. When he saw Amina, his expression did not change, but something in his body language shifted, like he was standing in the middle of a decision he had thought was already made and suddenly found out he had to make it again. "Colonel Raza," he said. "Sir," Amina said, "I am requesting authorization for emergency intercept. The F-22 has a 6-minute fuel and altitude window before the pilot either crashes or ejects over unrecoverable terrain. Flight Lieutenant Danish cannot make the intercept in that time window. I can, in 3 minutes." The general looked at the F-17 behind her. He looked back at her. He was probably thinking about the paperwork, the liability, the insurance of his career if this went wrong. He was probably thinking about all the reasons why he should say no, why he should do this by the book, why he should wait for Danish even if it meant the F-22 pilot died in the waiting. He was probably also thinking about 12 years ago, about the woman who had lost her husband in a training accident and had asked to stop flying, and how he had believed that was mercy. "Your last flight check was in 2012, the general said. "Yes, sir," Amina said. "You have not been in a combat cockpit since before my grandson was born," the general said. "No, sir," Amina said. "And you think you can fly an intercept on a pilot you do not know, in an aircraft you have not touched in a decade, with a foreign military asset depending on your performance?" the general asked. "I think," Amina said, "that I am the only option you have that might actually work." The general was quiet for a long time. Then he turned to the flight controller who had been standing behind him the entire time, a young major named Rashid. "Launch her," the general said. "Intercept authorization granted. She is command from this moment forward." And that was it. That was the moment when the 12 years broke like something glass and Amina Raza became Viper again. If you're watching this story right now and you haven't subscribed yet, do it before we get to the hard part. I promise you the hard part is coming, and people who know what's about to happen always come back to these stories. They stay till the end, they read the comments, they share it with people who did not subscribe yet. So subscribe now and stay till the end. Tell me in the comments which country you are watching from tonight. I read every single one. The cockpit of the F-17 felt smaller than it used to, which meant it had not changed and she had. Everything about it was familiar and foreign at the same time. The ejection seat felt like an old friend who had become a stranger. The oxygen system felt like something that belonged to a different version of her life. The stick felt like something that was going to remember exactly how much pressure she had forgot to carry. She ran through the checklist without thinking, the words already in her mouth before she had to consciously form them. Hydraulics, electrical systems, fuel status. The systems check was like a conversation with an old language she had not spoken since the last time she flew, but that lived somewhere in her muscle memory anyway. 2 minutes until launch. The ground crew was clear. The engines were warm. The runway ahead was straight and empty and waiting like it always had been. She keyed the radio. "Tower, this is Viper, requesting launch authorization for emergency intercept." There was a pause, just a half-second pause, which was nothing in real time but felt like the entire history of her life crashing into the present moment at once. "Viper, you are cleared for immediate launch," the tower said, and she could hear in his voice that he knew who Viper was, that her call sign had been brought back into the present tense by circumstance, and that the decision to use it again was not something anybody was going to talk about until later, if they talked about it at all. The acceleration down the runway felt like coming back to life. It It felt like 12 years of being still, being quiet, being nothing, compressing into a single moment of motion and intention and becoming the kind of person who had a purpose beyond filing paperwork. The nose came up and the wheels left the ground, and for 1 second Amina Raza was neither the woman she had been nor the woman she had become. She was only Viper, which meant she was only the pilot. The J-10 climbed into clean air and turned toward the northern corridor where the F-22 was losing altitude in slow, lazy circles, like a bird that had already made peace with falling. On the radio, the intercept controller was giving her vectors, altitude callouts, distance measurements, numbers that were supposed to keep her oriented in space and time, except her orientation was simpler than numbers. She was flying toward a problem. She was flying toward someone who needed her. The numbers were just there to make sure she got there in time. 2 minutes and 40 seconds from launch, she had visual on the F-22. It was not circling the way a healthy aircraft circles. It was drifting, the way something that was not being piloted drifted, the way something with nobody thinking inside it moved. The American aircraft was pale blue against gray mountain sky, and its flight path was getting lower with every passing second, not because the pilot was choosing to descend, but because there was nobody inside the cockpit making choices anymore. I have visual on Blaze 1, Amina said. Aircraft is in uncontrolled descent pattern. Pilot appears unresponsive. I am closing to formation distance to assess situation. She had her speed matched to the F-22 now, had slid into a position where she could see past the angle of the American aircraft's canopy and almost see the pilot inside. Almost. The angle was not quite good enough. The sun was in the wrong place. And everything inside her was screaming to close that distance, to get so close that she could see the pilot's face, see if his eyes were open, see if there was any sign of consciousness or if they had already, in the time it had taken her to get here, passed the point where consciousness mattered. She closed the distance anyway. 20 meters, 15, 10. Close enough to see the pilot now, close enough to see his head angled forward against the harness, close enough to see his hand loose on the stick, close enough to understand that, yes, he was unconscious, and yes, he was still breathing, and yes, she was going to have to make him stop being unconscious with a method that was not in any current manual, because no current manual anticipated the situation where the only available intercept aircraft had to wake up a pilot with dangerous proximity flying. Blaze 1 pilot, she said on the emergency frequency, knowing it was probably pointless but needing to try anyway. This is Viper Intercept, do you copy? Wake up, pilot, we need you to wake up right now. Nothing but empty air and the sound of her own breathing, loud inside the oxygen mask. She thought about Tariq. She did not mean to. It was not a choice. It just happened the way memories happen when you are about to do something dangerous, like your brain deciding to remind you of the last time you did something dangerous and how that had worked out. Tariq had been a pilot too, back when she was flying combat missions and he was flying chase for her training runs. He had been very good at his job, which meant the accident had not been about being bad. The accident had just been about the 1,000 variables that could all line up on the same day and decide to take someone's life without asking permission. She pushed the memory away and moved her aircraft closer to the F-22's right wing. The wake turbulence from her aircraft should hit the American jet like a physical hand, shaking it, buffeting it, forcing the unconscious pilot's body into awareness through sheer mechanical violence. It was not a technique that was supposed to work in doctrine. But doctrine had given her 6 minutes and she had needed 3, so she had already exceeded her time budget for following instructions. She pulled up hard and cut in close enough that the physics took over, that the air moving off her wings became aggressive enough to matter, that the F-22 suddenly started bouncing like something caught in a storm. The pilot's head came up, his hand went tight on the stick. Blaze 1, wake up, Amina said. Get your oxygen reseated, check your mask now, do it immediately. The pilot's eyes were open now, panic-white and searching, trying to understand what was happening, trying to understand why an aircraft was flying so close that the wingtip lights were visible in his peripheral vision. He fumbled with his mask. She watched his hands shake, watched him pull the oxygen mask off and slam it back in place, watched him gasp as clean air hit his oxygen-starved brain and the consciousness came crashing back like a light switch someone had just thrown. Mayday, mayday, I'm airborne, something failed, I don't. His voice cracked on the radio, fractured by confusion and the shock of waking up and finding himself already dead if he had not woken up in exactly that second. Blaze 1, this is Viper, Amina said, her own voice steady because she was not allowed to be afraid when someone was depending on her to be the opposite of afraid. You experienced oxygen failure and hypoxia. You have been unconscious for approximately 3 minutes. Your aircraft is currently at 12,000 feet on descent vector into terrain. You need to execute a controlled climb to safe altitude now. Can you do that? Yes, I can. How do I know you are? The pilot was still confused, still not entirely present, but present enough to respond to instructions, and that was all Amina needed. You know me because I am flying formation on your right wing and I am not letting you crash, Amina said. Follow my aircraft up, match my heading, I will get you to stable altitude. You can argue about credentials when we are both on the ground. She turned the F-17 into a gentle climb and watched in her canopy reflection as the F-22 banked to follow. Watched as his altitude numbers started going up instead of down. Watched as they both escaped the gravity well of the mountains and climbed toward the kind of air where breathing came naturally, and pilots did not have to fight their own oxygen systems to stay alive. The intercept controller was trying to raise her on the radio, but she was not responding yet. She was focused on the F-22's wing position, on her own altitude tape, on the knowledge that hypoxia did strange things to consciousness, and this pilot was still only 3 minutes back from being dead and might not stay conscious if she let him. Blaze 1, talk to me, she said. Stay with me, tell me your name. Captain Marcus, the pilot said, his voice still shaky but getting steadier with every breath. Captain Marcus Webb, United States Air Force. When did you intercept me? 3 minutes ago, Amina said, when you were at 16,000 feet still descending. The math said you had about 3 more minutes after that. So Captain Marcus started to understand it, started to realize the width of the margin between alive and the alternative. You were, Amina said, now you are not, now you are at 18,000 feet and climbing, now you have made a choice to keep flying instead of choosing to stop. She guided him up and toward the southern approach vectors, still talking, still keeping him grounded in the present tense, still refusing to let him fall back into whatever shock or panic was sitting on the other side of that brief unconsciousness. By the time they were at 22,000 feet and the terrain below was no longer a threat, Captain Marcus's breathing had evened out. By the time they were beginning the approach back toward the base, he was actually functioning again, making his own small inputs to the controls, understanding that an F-22 and a F-17 were working in formation toward the same runway. By the time they landed, there was an ambulance waiting, a doctor waiting, and enough personnel standing around the flight line that it was clear everyone on the base had been watching the entire emergency unfold on the screens in the operations room. But before Amina could even power down the aircraft, the radio crackled with a message directed to her call sign specifically. Viper, this is command. You are requested at the operations building immediately upon landing. She shut down the engines. She climbed out of the cockpit slower than she had climbed in because her hands were shaking now that they had nothing to do, and adrenaline was finally catching up with her, and 12 years of not doing the thing she had been made for was suddenly screaming at her that she had just crossed some kind of line that nobody was going to let her cross back over. General Farrak was waiting for her at the operations building. So was an American colonel she did not recognize, wearing the insignia of Air Defense Command, and so were at least 8 other people in various uniforms, each of them looking at her like she had just solved a problem or created one, and nobody was quite sure yet which. Colonel Raza, General Farrak said, and his voice was careful in the specific way authority got careful when it was about to make a decision that would have consequences. The American military is requesting a full debriefing on the emergency intercept. They are also requesting that you remain available for the next week to consult on joint operation protocols between our service and theirs. Amina stood in her flight suit, which was still warm from the cockpit, and waited. Additionally, the general said, I have been informed that your flight status is, as of now, being restored to active. Your currency training will begin immediately. You are being assigned to the fast jet combat rotation. She still did not say anything because this was the point at which saying things became dangerous, became a choice between accepting the thing that had just happened or trying to explain to a general officer why she could not possibly accept it. I know, the general said, and something in his expression suggested he understood her silence better than she would have liked, that you had reasons for asking to step back. I know that those reasons were real. But an unconscious pilot and 6 minutes of fuel does not care about reasons. It only cares about solutions. And you, Colonel, were the only solution that could work. The American colonel stepped forward and extended his hand. Colonel Raza, I am Colonel Harrison, attached to the Joint Exercise Command. I wanted to personally thank you for saving one of my pilots. "You did not have to do that. You took a significant risk." Amina shook his hand, which was warm and professional and American, which was to say it was exactly the same as all the other hands she had ever shaken in a military context. "He was unconscious," she said. "He would have died if I had not." "Exactly," Colonel Harrison said. "That is the whole point. You knew that and you went anyway. That is what we call bravery." When everyone had finally left the operations building, and the debriefing was over, and the paperwork had been filed, and the decision to reinstate her active status had been made official in documents that would be filed away and never read again until someone pulled them out 12 years in the future to wonder why she had been removed in the first place, Zara was waiting for her outside. "Ma'am," Zara said, "you were incredible." "I was lucky," Amina said. "You were incredible," Zara repeated like she was correcting a test answer. "And now you are going to be flying again, which means I have about 100 questions I have been waiting 12 years to ask but did not think I would ever get to ask." 12 years is a long time to wait for anything, Amina said. "Yes," Zara said, "which is exactly why I am so angry that you were not flying the entire time. Do you understand? You were good enough to save someone's life while literally not flying for a decade. Do you understand how good that makes you?" Amina understood. She understood, and she did not know what to do with understanding, because understanding meant accepting that the 12 years had been some kind of loss, and she had spent the entire 12 years telling herself they had been necessary, that they had been protection, that they had been the only choice she could live with. But now there was a pilot named Marcus Webb in the hospital, probably still shaking, probably still trying to understand how close he had come to not existing. And he existed because Amina had chosen to be the person she was instead of the person she had decided to become. Over the next week, as she went through the intensive refresher training and the psychological evaluation and all the paperwork that reinstatement required, she began to understand something else. She began to understand that losing 12 years and saving one pilot were not the same thing, which meant she was both the woman who had been erased and the woman who had done the erasing, and there was no way to separate those two things into a story where one person was right and the other was wrong. Captain Marcus came to find her on the 8th day when he was cleared from the hospital and discharged from medical hold. "Colonel Raza," he said, and he was still pale, still moving a little carefully like his body was reminding him what it felt like to almost not be alive. "I wanted to thank you again, face to face, not through medical procedures." "You are welcome," Amina said. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that he should not thank her. He should thank the specific alignment of circumstances that had put her in the right place at the right time. He should thank the luck that had allowed her muscles to remember what her mind had been trying to forget. "I wanted to ask you something," Marcus said. "Why are you hidden? Everyone here knows who you are, but nobody talks about it. Nobody even uses your call sign except when it comes over the radio. It is like you are a ghost who used to be a person, and then today you became a person again, and nobody quite knows how to treat you now." "Because," Amina said, "for a long time I did not know how to be a person anymore. I only knew how to be the wife of someone who died, and then I only knew how to be someone who was trying to survive the person I used to be." "That sounds lonely," Marcus said. "It was," Amina said, "but it was also the only way I knew how to make sure I did not hurt myself by being who I was." She did not tell him about Tarek, about the training accident, about the specific moment when she had decided that the best way to grieve was to stop being the thing that had gotten him killed in the first place, which was to say, stop being a pilot. She did not tell him about the voice in her head that had spent 12 years saying she deserved to be safe and small and invisible because the alternative was to be the kind of person who made dangerous choices, and those dangerous choices had consequences. She did not tell him that sitting in a cockpit again, climbing back toward altitude, making decisions that other people's lives depended on, had felt like the most honest thing she had done since Tarek died. "Will you keep flying now?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Amina said, and she was surprised at how much certainty was in her voice. "I think I will." The court-martial, when it came 6 months later, was not because of Captain Marcus or the emergency intercept or anything about the flight itself. It was because Amina had spent the following months flying advanced intercept missions and had, during a joint exercise with the American military, achieved a perfect intercept and gun kill simulation on one of their newer F-35 aircraft. The American military had complained officially that she had been aggressive, that she had flown outside the bounds of professional exercise, that she had, in essence, demonstrated that she was a better fighter pilot than some of their own qualified pilots. The complaint had gone up the chain of command, and by the time it reached a certain level, it had transformed from being a complaint about one intercept into a complaint about a woman pilot, recently reinstated after 12 years of sitting at a desk, being allowed to fly at all. General Farrokh read the charges to her in his office, in private, with the door closed. "I signed this order," he said, meaning the court-martial order. "I want you to understand that I signed this personally. It does not matter who recommended it or who believed it was the right thing to do. I made the decision." "Yes, sir," Amina said. "I am not a coward," the general said, "but I am also not a suicide mission. There are people in this military who believe that a woman pilot, regardless of how capable she is not supposed to be better than American pilots. There are people who believe that the message we are sending by allowing you to fly, and more importantly by allowing you to win, is the wrong message. There are people who believe that the emergency intercept was interesting, but was not supposed to be the beginning of your career again. It was supposed to be the exception that proved the rule." "Which is?" Amina asked. "That women pilots are acceptable as long as they are not threatening," the general said. "That they can fly as long as they do not win, that they can prove themselves as long as they do not prove themselves too well." Amina was quiet because there was nothing to say that would change the fundamental mathematics of the situation. General Farrokh was being honest with her about why she was being charged, which was more than most people would have done. He was also still charging her, which meant his honesty had a limit. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," the general said, "you go to court-martial. You are charged with aggressive flying, with violating exercise protocols, with being, technically, insubordinate to a flight controller during a training mission. The charges are weak, which means they are hoping you will take a settlement and step down quietly. They are hoping you will not fight." "Will I be convicted?" Amina asked. "No," the general said, "the evidence will not support conviction, but you will have to fight for that, and the fight itself will be the punishment. You will have to relive every decision you made, every moment you flew, every second of the emergency intercept, and you will have to explain it all to men who are hoping you will eventually just be tired of explaining." The court-martial lasted 3 weeks. They called witnesses. They called Bilal and Hassan and the tower operators and the American colonel and even Captain Marcus, who testified that Amina had saved his life and that the emergency intercept had been, by any reasonable measure, the correct decision under extreme circumstances. They also called men who testified that the emergency intercept, while successful, had been dangerous, that it had violated procedures, that it had been the kind of thing that should have been attempted by a current active duty pilot, not someone who had been inactive for 12 years. Nobody said the actual thing they were all thinking, which was that they did not want women pilots being better than men pilots, and they certainly did not want women pilots being better than American pilots. During the trial, Amina's phone rang at the end of the first week. It was Zara calling from the base. "Ma'am, I am resigning," Zara said without any preamble. "I am resigning from active duty and I am transferring to civilian aviation instruction." "Why?" Amina asked, although she thought she knew the answer. "Because watching you fight this alone is not the kind of system I want to participate in anymore," Zara said. "You proved you were the best pilot on this base and the response was to charge you. That is not a system that gets better. That is a system that decides one woman is too threatening and makes sure the next one is more compliant." "You do not have to resign," Amina said. "Yes, I do," Zara said, "because I get to make that choice. You fought for 12 years to not make a choice about who you were, and I am not willing to do that. I am going to teach civilian pilots, and I am going to tell every single one of them about the woman who was called Viper, and about how the military decided that being excellent was the same as being dangerous, and about how one pilot changed everything and then had to defend changing everything in a courtroom." After Zara hung up, Amina sat in her hotel room and understood something she had been avoiding understanding for 12 years. Understanding it had consequences. Understanding it meant that she had not actually been protecting herself by stepping back, by filing paperwork, by becoming invisible. Understanding it meant that she had been punishing herself for something that was not her fault. Tariq had died because training accidents happen. They happen to good pilots. They happen to careful pilots. They happen because flying is the thing that kills people, and nobody gets to opt out of that risk when they choose to get in a cockpit. And she had chosen to get in a cockpit every single day for the first 15 years of her career because she loved it more than she was afraid of it, and that had been the right choice, and when it killed her husband, she had decided that somehow that meant the choice was wrong. The court-martial ended on a Friday. The verdict was not guilty on all counts. The judges noted in their written decision that the emergency intercept had been appropriate, that the aggressive flying had been within acceptable parameters for the situation, and that Amina Raza had demonstrated superior performance under extreme circumstances. The judges also noted that, while the charges were not supported by evidence, they were recommending a command review of her reinstatement to active duty, and that some of the concerns raised by the plaintiffs regarding integration of high-performing female pilots into mixed units were worth further consideration. In other words, they were saying she had not done anything wrong, but they were suggesting that the system was still entitled to decide she should not have done what she did. General Farooq offered her a position the day after the verdict. It was not a flying position. It was a command position, administrative oversight of training protocols, a desk job but a better desk job, one with authority and respect and no flying involved. "You have a choice," the general said. "Take this position and the system accepts you. It says yes, you can be part of us but not as a pilot, as an administrator, as someone who teaches other people how to be the thing you used to be." "And if I do not take it?" Amina asked. "Then you go back to active combat rotation," the general said. "You keep flying, you keep competing, you keep being the thing that makes people uncomfortable, and the system will keep trying to push you out and eventually it will find a way that works." Amina thought about Zahra, about Captain Marcus, about the 12 years of silence, about the moment she had climbed back into a cockpit and remembered exactly who she was. "I keep flying," she said. The general nodded like he had already known that was what she would say, like he had been testing her not to see if she would take the safe option, but to see if she was still the woman who had never been able to take the safe option in the first place. "Then you keep flying," he said, "and I will keep protecting your back until I retire. After that, you will be on your own." "That is fair," Amina said. Over the next year, Amina Raza became Viper again in the way that meant something different than it had meant before. She was not the mysterious genius hiding her capabilities. She was not the quiet legend that everyone whispered about in the maintenance bay. She was simply a pilot who flew well and did not apologize for it, and who trained other pilots with the specific knowledge of someone who had learned that you only get one life, and it is worth doing the thing you love even if doing it means risking everything. Zahra started coming back to the base on weekends, bringing civilian pilot trainees, showing them the aircraft, telling them the stories, making sure that the women pilots who came after them would understand that they did not have to disappear to be acceptable. Captain Marcus sent a video message on the one-year anniversary of the emergency intercept. He had made full recovery and was back flying F-22s. He wanted Amina to know that he had kept the flight recording from the day she intercepted him, and that he watched it sometimes when he had to make a decision about something, because it reminded him that there were people who would fly toward a problem instead of away from it. And on a morning in June, exactly 1 year after the emergency intercept, General Farooq called Amina into his office one more time. "I am retiring," he said. "In 3 months, I wanted to tell you personally." "Thank you for 12 years of protection," Amina said. "No," the general said. "Thank you for proving me wrong about who you were supposed to become. I believed I was showing you mercy by asking you to step back. I understand now that I was asking you to hurt yourself to make me more comfortable. That is not something I get to ask of you again." "Will you stop the protections?" Amina asked. "The pressure will probably get worse after you retire." "It probably will," the general said, "but I have spent the last year making connections with people in higher positions, people who understand that the best pilots should be allowed to be the best pilots, regardless of what they look like or what gender they are. When I retire, you will not be as alone as I am leaving you. There are people waiting to step in." 3 months later, when the general left the base for the last time, Amina realized something. She was not the same woman who had hidden for 12 years. She was not the same woman who had been erased. She was not the woman who had decided that survival meant disappearing. She was the woman who flew. She was Viper. She was the person who had understood when it mattered most that hiding was just another way of dying. But she was also changed. She carried the weight of the 12 years now, the weight of the choice to stop flying, the weight of understanding that the system had decided to accept her not because she had proven herself, but because she had saved an American pilot, and the optics of punishing her for that were too visible. She understood now that the system was not going to change just because she had done something brave. The system would only change when enough women pilots had done something brave and refused to accept that bravery should cost them their careers. And in the years after that, as she trained new pilots and fought for policy changes and continued to fly, she understood something else. The 12 years had not been wasted. They had given her the knowledge of what it felt like to lose herself, which meant she understood exactly how much she had been worth, and how much every woman pilot who came after her was worth, and how important it was to make sure they never had to make the choice she had made. If you watched this whole story and you understand what it cost her to come back, subscribe and make sure you see the next one. Because there are more stories like this and more pilots like Amina, and I am going to keep telling them until the world understands that the best pilots are the people who are willing to fly toward the thing everyone else is running away from. Comment below and tell me, do you think the system deserved forgiveness, or do you think it should have changed before she ever had to prove herself? I read every answer and I genuinely believe there is more than one right response to that question. That is what makes the real stories different from the simple ones. Real stories do not have endings that everyone agrees on, they just have endings that matter.